This video is made possible by Skillshare. The first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership so you can explore your creativity. In recent months, Formula 1 has expressed desire to boost interest in the United States, but rather than give the country some lithium, they have opted instead to give the land of opportunity a second race on the calendar. The most likely candidates for a second race would either be in Las Vegas or Miami, with Miami already well into the planning stage to get a Grand Prix down there. Not really sure why they want one, but either way, it has had a few snags along the road. In fact, pretty much the majority of American Grand Prix have had problems during the course of Formula 1's history, but none more so than what New York City encountered. Yep, Formula 1 has tried to stage a race in New York City, and as one would probably guess, Formula 1 has failed to stage a race in New York City. Now at this stage, you're probably a bit curious about all of this, about how such a race could not come to fruition. Well, there is a bit of a story to that. Now some of you more pedantic folk will be saying, Formula 1 has raced in New York, Watkins Glen. Yes, Watkins Glen is in the state of New York, but that isn't what we're discussing here. We're talking about New York City, the city that never sleeps, the place with rat-infested subways, and the home of the Yankees. I don't know what's worse actually. But in any case, Formula 1 last raced at Watkins Glen in 1980, after which time, F1 would go on to stage Grand Prix in Detroit, Long Beach, Las Vegas, Dallas, Phoenix, Indianapolis, and now Austin. Back in the 80s, Formula 1's hard-on for America was evident, and that was best demonstrated when in 1982, there were 3 American Grand Prix on the calendar. But when Long Beach left the schedule, a new race was needed to fill the void. At least that was what was wanted, and proposals were put in place to host a race in New York. The venue was either to be at the Meadowlands Sports Complex in New Jersey, Meadow Lake in Flushing Meadows, or Mitchell Air Force Base in Hempstead, Long Island. Eventually, plans were organised for a race in Flushing Meadows. The circuit kinda looked like Albert Park if it were designed by someone in the midst of a seizure. It wouldn't matter though, as the race would not get off the ground. It was delayed again and again, but come 1986, the circuit plans were dead in the water. Fast forward to the early 2010s, there is no race situated in the United States, and no Americans on the Formula 1 grid itself. There was no need for America to be interested in Formula 1 at this point. That was until word got around that a race in New York was to be attempted once again. On May 2010, Bernie Ecclestone announced that plans were afoot for a race in New York City in 2012. There were several areas discussed as viable candidates for the race. These included Jersey City's Liberty State Park, Staten Island, Floyd Bennett Field, and Meadowlands. But ultimately, plans were finalized for the race to take place across the Hudson in New Jersey. So technically, this race wasn't in New York. I know, minor details. Actually, it's a pretty big detail, but the crucial thing is that the Manhattan skyline would overlook the circuit, providing one of the more picturesque views for any circuit on the calendar. Probably. The Wall Street Journal broke the news first in August 2011 that a race situated in Weehawken and West New York would take place in 2013. Although others did mention of the fact that it would require approval from Hudson County officials before the race could take place. Finally, on October 25th, 2011, the announcement was made that starting from 2013, the Grand Prix of America would take place on a street circuit that would be situated in Port Imperial, New Jersey. Smiles all around. But as they would later find out, hosting a Formula 1 race is the hardest thing to pull off in New Jersey next to parking airships. The campaign was led by one Leo Hendry, a businessman based in the Big Apple who loved motor racing. In fact, this dude competed in Le Mans several times, winning in his class in 2005. Heading the Port Imperial Racing Associates organization that was behind the whole thing, he enlisted the help of Tilke America for the track design. Of course, they weren't going to pick any guy off the street. They needed someone with a Skillshare. That wasn't a good segue, wasn't it? Oh well, Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes for creative and curious people. Through this platform, you can explore new skills and broaden your knowledge of whatever it is you're passionate about. I have people asking me all the time for tips regarding video editing and animation, but frankly, asking me for advice on animation isn't exactly the best option. However, if you want proper advice on that stuff, with guidance from people with actual knowledge in that field, Skillshare has that on offer. It's helped me out too. I've recently finished up on Christopher Rhodes' class on how to shoot a film project on a budget. It's not just about how to save money here and there. It's a comprehensive review of the entire filmmaking process, which would be especially helpful to anyone out there looking to venture into making their own creative features without waterworlding yourself. There are heaps of classes for a wide variety of topics. There is likely something in there that will be of some interest to you. Skillshare's affordability is very attractive too, with it being on offer for less than $10 a month with annual subscription. I still need to work on enunciation. If you're still undecided, you can get a taster of the platform. The first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will receive a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. So thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. But getting back to the track here, the circuit would be based in Port Imperial, climbing the Hudson Palisades to Boulevard East, before descending the Palisades to rejoin Port Imperial Boulevard. The circuit was meant to be 3.2 miles in length and had 19 corners in total. Now, this circuit was a weird one at that. I mean, for one thing, the pit straight was based next to the New York Waterway Ferry Terminal, which means fans trackside weren't too far away from going into the drink if things went awry. And halfway around the track, the cars would be passing a sewage treatment plant, which kinda was fitting in retrospect.
They do a race in New York, and then they go past the place full of number 2.
Although, to be fair, it did look like an interesting track, with a few places to pass, varying degrees of elevation, and low-income houses for peasants to look from. There was also some promotional stuff surrounding the whole thing, where Sebastian Vettel would drive around the track the wrong way sometimes, but he put a car through its paces around the track. They also gave David Coulthard a go around the track, although little did we know, at the time at least, that this was about as close as we were going to get to having a Formula 1 race around this circuit. The Grand Prix was penciled in for a 2013 debut, where it would be run on June 16, 1 week after the Canadian Grand Prix. However, in September 2012, just days after Eccleston announced the race, he had announced that the contract for the race had been torn up, as the organisers had not complied with the terms and conditions of the contract. The mayor of Weehawken announced that the race would be postponed until 2014, and by this stage, anyone aware of how these things played out began thinking, okay, I see where this is going. Despite this setback, the race promoters claimed that the Grand Prix was on schedule for the 2014 date and that work would begin on the circuit lickety-split. However, there was an issue with what Hendry Jr. was saying. The campaign was plagued with monetary issues, and money is ultimately what drives these projects. The state wasn't going to fund it, and a GoFundMe wasn't going to cut it either when you're talking about trying to draw in the world's most overpriced sport to your side of the Hudson. He had put 10 million of his own money into the venture, although 100 million was required for the race to go ahead. 10 million more was borrowed from the Formula 1 group itself, and a new 15-year contract was signed for the Grand Prix after the organisers agreed to work with the founder of the Long Beach Grand Prix. And so, on August 23rd, 2013, Bernie Eccleston had announced that the inaugural Grand Prix of America would not take place and was cancelled once again. This was after the organisers had once again failed to raise the 100 million required for the race to be held. Hendry claimed that this was some kind of administrative error and had claimed that the promoters had submitted all necessary entry fees required for an inclusion on the 2014 calendar. Supposedly, the race was meant to be held on June the 1st, and on the 27th of September 2013, the FIA had confirmed its inclusion on the provisional calendar. However, when the finalised calendar came out later that year, guess what wasn't there? The race was once again postponed, although Bernie was still insistent on this race going ahead. Although, if there was one person he had given up on, it was Hendry, who was still trying to make this thing happen. He found some people willing to fork out some dough for the race, but then they dropped out. Bernie entertained the idea of postponing the race until 2016, but since then, nothing's happened. Any prospect of the race happening there now seems to be out of the question given the development that's happened there. The building meant to be the pit complex is now a shopping centre and parking lot, not to mention the difficulty with hosting a race there logistically. However, with Formula 1 looking to introduce a second American Grand Prix onto the calendar, maybe a race in New York could still happen. There's already the Formula E race that's held in Brooklyn, so maybe a Grand Prix in the New York metropolitan area is still a possibility, especially given the attempt to increase interest in the country that has ruined too many things. Or maybe the city doesn't have the appetite for it. I mean, who knows? You guys reckon there should be a race in the Big Apple? I think you know what to do. Anyways, thank you all for watching. Drop a comment below, subscribe to the channel if you're awesome, and always remember, keep it respectful, be wholesome, don't be a marnus, and as always, I'll see you all later.